there's it's whoop,
Okay.
yes, line 20 where Rabbi Yishmael responds to this.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then Omer Rabbi Yishmael, and we said Omer Rabbi Yishmael says he has a kal b'chema, and then he said mag grusha shemoteres letruma. So just like a widow is, so just like a divorcee
Hmm.
that is allowed to have eat truma, nevertheless she is also for kahuna. Zu, this Sotah, she'asura batruma, this Sotah, who is also to eat truma, ein adin, isn't it logical that she should also be prohibited to marry into the priesthood?
Hmm.
Now, we use the expression kal v'chema, and we we discussed last time the idea of this kal v'chema to try to understand how this fits in and connects.
Hmm.
In fact, the Gemara itself has the same question,
Hmm.
and the Gemara, when we get to it, right, when we get to the end of the quote of this brisa, will in fact take up this discussion and then say, what, how does this how does this statement from Rabbi Yishmael fit into where we want to go
Hmm.
with understanding about the Sotah?
Okay.
In essence, Rabbi Yishmael has started on the idea of a divorced of a divorced woman and ends off with a statement saying she can't get married to a Cohen. So the Gemara actually asks later, what's the value of this discussion? You started the discussion based on a divorced woman, and you end up talking about priesthood.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the connective point, Rabbi
Yeah.
Yishmael?
Yeah.
That's the Gemara's statement at the end at the end of the quotation of the
Okay.
text. So
Okay.
we'll look at it. We'll look at it at when we get to that point.
Okay.
But the Gemara continues with quoting of the Brisa and wants to and wants to understand from the quotations from the quote from wants to add to our understanding of an idea which relates to Sotah from quoting everything that it's quoting at the moment.
Hmm.
So we started off. The Brisa started off with the three mentions of Nitma according to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yishmael has introduced his Kal B'chema, saying that I don't need three mentions for that purpose. I can do with two, right? And some logic. Then the Brisa continues a discussion.
Right.
Okay, continuing the Brisa's discussion, we learn something very interesting as follows. The Brisa wants to understand from that expression of Venitma, which one of the Venitmas that we quoted, it wants to understand something specific about it. So the Brisa continues by citing an additional understanding in relation to the Venitma. What's the meaning? Ma Talmud Lema Vehi Nitma. What's the meaning when the verse states, with regard to the cases in which the husband can come make her drink, that it says Vehi Nitma, Vehi Loid Nitma. It seems a funny expression in the verse. It first says that she is defiled,
Right.
And then it says she hasn't been defiled.
Right.
So what's the intent of the verse? So the verse, as the verse goes, and we've got it in the expilated text, and he warns his wife, and she is defiled. Or if the spirit of jealousy comes upon him, and he warns his wife, and she is not defiled. So we want to understand the two types of statuses that the woman has come through. So the Gemara continues and asks, if she's defiled, because the verse seems to explicitly discuss that she has, and come to a conclusion that she is defiled, right? So in that case, if she is defiled, the Brisa continues, Im nitma lama shesa. If she is defiled, why does she need to drink? If the verse in its strength is quite positive of saying that she is defiled, then why does she need to drink?
Mm-hmm.
And if she is not defiled, right, Im loy nitma,
Right.
lama loy mash, lama, Im loy nitma, she hasn't been defiled, so I don't have anything wrong about her. Lama mashka, why do I make her drink? So the Brisa then continues, and this is a very deep something to understand. The Brisa answers that Magid Lacha, that it's there to teach you, Magid Lacha Kosev. The verse is teaching you explicitly that Shahasofik Asura, that being that there's a case of uncertainty, that is, she was warned prior, as the verse has told us, but she is in a state of uncertainty. The verse is telling us that there's an uncertainty, and in the case that there's an uncertainty, she is still called osur, she is still called prohibited. Reading his text, the verse tells you that it's discussing a case where there exists an uncertainty as to whether the woman was faithful to her husband,
Yeah.
yet it is prohibited for her to engage in any sexual relationship with her husband until the matter is clarified, so that she is in the Sophic status Sotah.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm using that expression Sophic Sotah, but she's really a Sotah, because any Sotah, right, that any Sotah is a person who's in an undetermined status.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But what we have understood, the Brisa will now continue, is a different concept than you expect. What is that? This is the words of the Brisa continuing.
Yes.
And it says, Mikan atadon l'sheretz. From here, you can extrapolate and use as a basis for a case which with in regard to the tumah that comes from the definition of a sheretz, of a creeping animal, or a worm, a lizard, etc., which makes use into the status of tumah and wouldn't allow a kohen to go into the Beis Hamikdash, for instance. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And before you do a korban, a person would have to go through the requisite process for taking the toma away to go become toher. Okay.
Yes.
So going back, the Brisa says, "Makan ata don l'sharetz." Now you can understand a specific halacha in a case of something which happens when you involved with a sheretz. What's the case? The case of an uncertainty, the case of a suffix.
Okay.
So we're coming from an explicit verse which has told us about the circumstances of the Sotah. The verse told us, Venitma, she is Tome, but we know that she's not a absolutely defined Sotah. She's in a state of uncertainty.
Mhm.
Nevertheless, the verse has called her Tome, or yes, or the verse has called the circumstances Tome. Then the one, and who is Tome? She's Tome to her husband, right? But even though
Mhm.
we haven't determined the case,
Right. Right.
so here we have a circumstance where I can potentially understand that if a person becomes Tome by touching a sheretz in an undefined circumstance, in a sophic circumstance,
Okay.
I can possibly, I'm trying to build a model, I can possibly extrapolate and say that in a case of uncertainty also, in a place where the circumstances are similar, that a sophic Tome circumstance will render a person Tome,
Yeah.
even though I don't know explicitly that it's
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah.
Where is the case? Now, the Brisa now continues on with bringing this idea to bear and says, Ma Sotah, and says, just like in the case of the Sotah, Shaloi Osabe Shegeg, that just like a Sotah, where the Sotah itself, Shalo Osabe Shegeg Kamezed Va'enes Karotzen, in a case of a Sotah person, if there was a shegeg, if there was a circumstance that that in some sort of accidental way she had relations, that's not considered intentional, or there was an anus, or if there was a case of rape
Mhm.
while she was in the status of Sotah, the posuk does not define that as a person who was a person. Say in the case of rape, the person is an unwilling component to it, right?
Mhm.
She is not treated as a. She's not treated like an intentional um, event, and therefore she wouldn't be also she wouldn't be also because of that, and she wouldn't be punished. Nevertheless,
Yeah. Yeah.
in the case of Sotah, um, well, let me backtrack my words a little bit, right? So let's just read it again. Ma Sotah, just like in the circumstances of a Sotah, Shalom also by Shegeg B'mezid, where a standard woman, right? A standard woman is not considered that if there was something unintentional, she's not considered as if it would be intentional, and she's not punished. But also in a rape circumstances, she's not treated as a rotzen. So that's a rule which applies to all married women,
Mhm.
including a Sotah. But also but in a case of a Sotah, so we've said an unintended circumstance is not considered um, as as a as a punishable, but in the case, and is not made like certain. So in the case also by Sophic, nevertheless, in a case of a Sotah, Sophic is treated in a case of a Sotah as Sophic, a doubtful situation is treated like a vadai, like an absolute certain case.
Mhm.
So therefore, I can see that in an ordinary treatment, so therefore an ordinary treatment of a woman, if something happens accidentally or there was or a rape, so therefore there's that's and that seems to be not like a sophic. I know that it's happened, right? But the woman is not considered tome. However, there is but in a sophic, in a doubtful Sotah circumstances, she's treated like a vade, as if she is an
Mhm.
actual Sotah, and therefore she has to go drink the water, etc.
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
So also, in the case of a sheretz,
Right.
I can extrapolate and say that in the sheretz circumstances, there are some circumstances should also be shegig kamezid, that accidental, that where in sorry in a sheretz circumstances where the rule is that a shegig is considered a mazid, that an accidental touching of the sherets is considered that you did it on as if, or the
As if,
consequences
yeah,
as if you did it on
yeah,
purpose. And if
yeah,
there's an anus, and if there was a forced circumstance of somehow being involved with the sherets, it was beyond your, but you actually touched it. That's
yeah,
treated karotzen as if you did it willingly.
right.
So therefore, I'm extending and I'm using the logic. Ein
Right.
din, is it not logical? Sheyasa bos sophic, that in the case of a sophic sheretz, it must be treated kavade, like a vade
Yeah,
circumstance.
yeah, yeah.
So the brisa has now extended based on the concept of Sotah to sheretz, and both having an aspect of tome, right? That they are treated in a similar circumstances.
Yeah.
And continuing that theme, the brisa then continues. Umokom umamokom shaba'oso. And since we have come from the Sotah and used the Sotah as a source for the halacha with regard to uncertain ritual impurity,
Right.
some of the details of the halacha are also derived from the case of the Sotah. Therefore, from this place that you have come from, that is from the source, it is derived that just as the prohibition with regard to the Sotah applies in a specific circumstance,
Oh, yeah. Okay.
so ma Sotah, just like a Sotah circumstance happens in a private setting,
Yeah,
that is in a Rishus Yochid,
yeah.
then af sheretz, so also
Sure.
when we said the aspects which relate to Sophic Tome,
Oh,
af sheretz Rishus Yochid. So also
oh,
the rules of a Sophic sheretz Toma have to happen in a Rishus Yochid, in a
yeah,
private domain.
yeah,
That's one.
yeah.
That's one derivation of characteristic, that since I've based it on the commonality
Mhm.
with to do with Sotah, that commonality must extend into sheretz.
Mhm.
So it refers to sheretz then as well, that it has to happen in a private domain. And further, mas Sotah dover sheyesh bo das lishol, just as a Sotah is in an entity where the involved parties, sheyesh bo das lishol, have knowledge to impart, that lishol, that you can ask. In other words,
Oh,
I can interrogate and find and get an answer in some sort of way. So also there has to be the ideas of relationship to Sophic Toma.
oh,
It has to be in a circumstance where there is in a state of awareness that somebody can be asked, a person or an item may have contracted an impurity in a place where a person was present and then could have known. There has to be some sort of level of knowledge,
Okay.
unquestionable knowledge, for this idea of Sophic Toma to work. And
So a utensil wouldn't become tameh if no one was able to testify to that fact. Is that the idea? Somebody would have to be able to give some indication that
yes,
that happened. Okay. Okay. Okay.
um, and let's continue.
Okay.
And Mekan Omru, and we are continuing the text of the Brisa. Umekan Omru, Dober sheyesh bo das lishol. From here, the sages stated that if the entity has an awareness, in order for it to be asked, may have contracted the impurity in the private domain, then speaker tome. So Rishusa Yochid. So if it happens in a Rishusa Yochid, then we can enforce Sophic is Tome, that the unknown doubt is Tome. However, if there's a Sophic Tome Rishusa Rabim, then I will not say that the Sophic makes you Tome, but in fact we will say Toher, because our derivation has not extended that far.
Yeah.
So that's an implication of the first derivation, and an implication of the second derivation follows. And if there's a case of she'ein bo das lisho, and if there's a circumstance where there's a lack of awareness for it to be asked, then in that case, bein Rishusa Yochid, bein Rishusa Rabin, whether it happened in a private domain or a public domain, it goes to the rule of Sophic Toher, that in the doubtful circumstances, we can say it's Toher.
Yeah.
Why is that? Because both of those cases are not similar to the Sotah case where we derived things from.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the end of the teaching of the Brisa at this point.
Yes.
The Gemara then continues, and then the Gemara then continues and discusses some of the text of the Brisa. And the first thing that it asks is how we started our class, our learnings for today.
Yeah.
The first thing that it asks, and let's just say that statement. Let's just say this part, Rabbi Yishmael. So now, Rabbi Yishmael, when you quoted that original Brisa, Amar Rabbi Akiva Truma, Rabbi Akiva started when Rabbi Akiva was teaching it. What is the intention of Rabbi Shmuel? He must presumably is talking to Rabbi Akiva. He's speaking to the quote that we said from Rabbi Akiva, the Omer Rabbi Akiva. But and apparently Rabbi Akiva is talking about Truma. So umahadale iya kahuna. But Rabbi Yishmael's comment ended up by talking about that the lady is not allowed to go into Truma and not allowed to get married to a priest. So Rabbi Yishmael, your statement seems to not coincide with Rabbi Akiva.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be true what you're saying, Rabbi Yishmael, but Rabbi Akiva has not said that. Therefore, since Rabbi Yishmael knows that you can't, that the Sotah can't live, can't marry into the priesthood, we'll turn the tables on Rabbi Akiva and say, Vasul, the Rabbi Akiva. What about Rabbi Akiva? Kuhuna monole. How do you, Rabbi Akiva, know anything about her status in relationship to marrying a Kohen? And v'chi taima, and if you're going to say Kuhuna lo tzricha krod, and if you're going to say potentially, I don't need to, I don't need to know, because shahari also by sofik zena kazena, because in the case of a sofik zena, in the case of a woman who is a sofik zena, a doubtful zena, right? So and you know, and a zena cannot marry into a kohen. So in that case, truma. But truma nama lo tibayele. If you're going to say that I understand automatically that the Sotah can't marry a kohen, then since this lady can't marry the kohen, truma nama lo tibaya, then I won't need a verse for truma
Right.
also.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, shari also by sofik zena kazena, because we make a sofik zena like a zena. So how does Rabbi Yishmael know his details, and how does Rabbi Akiva know his details? So then we move. So then the Gemara moves ahead, and the continuation just flows. But it's very. But we'll just do it. We'll just read it quickly, and then we'll stop at this point, right?
Okay.
Ella Rabbi Akiva, but according to Rabbi Akiva, Abe Kroik Siba. But according to Rabbi Akiva, he must say that there are four sources of information, because we've got four circumstances which I need to know about, right? There is the first two that we've been discussing: the husband, the paramour. We've discussed truma, and now we're also discussing marriage to a further kohen. So according to Rabbi Akiva, and we know Rabbi Akiva expounds an extra letter, and so we can say that there are four places of exposition to learn from. There is, and also the superfluous vov in the word vanitma, so that gives me four opportunities, three mentions of vanitma, but four opportunities to learn out the rules, right? And that's what Rabbi Akiva will say,
Yeah.
right? And Rabbi and remember his Kal V'chomer, Rabbi Yishmael's Kal V'chomer started on the basis of one aspect, but ended off in marriage to a truma. So then Rabbi Yishmael will then say, Rabbi Yishmael Tlosa Kreik Sibing. Rabbi Yishmael says, I don't interpret that vov, but I can learn out Kal V'chomer. And I want to learn out the Kal V'chomer on the topic of the marriage of this woman to a further kohen, right? So that was my Kal V'chomer that I mentioned. And that's my idea in relationship to Kal V'chomer. So just reading the words, Rabbi Yishmael Trosa Kreik Siva, there are three mentions of the word Vanitma, Chad Labal, one for the husband, Chad Laboil, one for the paramour, Chad Latruma, and one for Truma, as you said, Rabbi Akiva, and the idea of kahuna, which I introduced, right, into the discussion, says Rabbi Yishmael, right, also a Kal V'chomer, I learn out from a Kal V'chomer. And that's how we understand it at this point. Right. The Gemara then continues, right? And the Gemara continues for further discussing aspects of the brisa.
Okay.
Okay. Do you want to do another 5 minutes more, or that's you going to stop now?
I think I should pause. Yeah, I think I should pause.
So
yeah.
we'll continue at our next opportunity.
Very good.
And and we'll see how the Gemara then continues the discussion.
Okay. Okay. Lovely.